that's the action monitoring schedule. So I think we can move on to the patient story next. Is that right, Kenny? Or are we ready to roll with that?
Yes, I think so. Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted that Lee's on the call. So welcome, Lee. We'll definitely have questions for you. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Really important that the board gets to hear people's experiences of our services. So I'll do, by way of an introduction to Lee. Lee has used our services at the Greenfield Centre and other areas as well, but predominantly the Greenfield Centre. Sorry, I've got a bit of feedback then. And also, Lee has importantly got some really important views as an ex-service person. So who's had military service. So the story is available. Encourage the board to watch it, and then I'm sure we can have a conversation subsequently.
Okay, so can I just confirm, can people see that? Yep, okay, here we go.
My name's Lee West. I'm 46 years old, an Army veteran, and I came in touch with the combined healthcare roughly around 2010, I think was the first contact. I left the Army in 2000. I joined at 16, so I'd done 10 years when I left at 26. I was very lucky to be offered a good job, but I was looking because it was really depressing me and making me feel quite ill, because the job I was actually a combat medic, basically a paramedic, but you know, trained for wartime, instead of dealing with things like depressive mood and old people, we were dealing with things like blast injuries and shotgun wounds and traumatic amputations and things. I'd got a lot of back problems because I'd had injuries during the Army, and also this, I didn't realise at the time, was PTSD. I went to the GP because I knew I had an issue long before I left the Army, but being in the Army is very difficult to bring it up and to talk about it with your colleagues or anybody. So, as the Army would say, it was soldier on. And when I came out, again, I was in denial, and I just kept putting it to the back of my mind. I kept having dips, sort of peaks and troughs of depressive moods and nightmares about things in the Army, one in particular. I had an incident, and I just felt, I don't want to go on, what's the point? So the GP sent me to the access team at the Harplands, and I was interviewed. I believe it was a social worker, if I remember rightly, but Martin Donlan was brought in as he's a veteran from the Navy, and he talked about a group that he was running at the time, and basically that's how it kind of started from there. I've been on ward 2 3 times, I think, and on ward 1 once, which was the most recent. But the staff, just amazing. You know, they deal with so many different types of illnesses, and there's so much going on. You know, right down from the domestic staff, you know, doing the cleaning and things. They're always extremely well mannered, and do you mind if, and knock on your door and things. And they're absolutely great. And then the care support workers, just ace. Love them to bits. Brill. The things they do, you know, the ward activities and what have you. So after a while, I drifted away again, and it was only in 2017, late 2017, that I saw the GP and asked to be referred back to the Greenfields. The turning point for me definitely was having Jason Snape choose me or take me on or whatever, and I've never done it before, and I don't know. There was just something about him. I don't know what it was. I just absolutely broke. I was begging him to help me. I said, please help me. I was crying, and there was snot, and there was coughing, and then Jason had to get an extra pack of Kleenex, and it was really emotional. But at the same time, it was like getting something off my chest that I needed to. And he stood and he listened, or sat and he listened, and then he drew. It's another terrible drawing, but he drew a brain on the whiteboard, And this thing in the brain, and he pointed out the bits and why things work the way they do. And I was taking it all in, but I took a photograph of it. And I've still got the photograph on my phone. It's still there, and I still look at it now today. And I think that was the catalyst. And at the end of the meeting that day, I said, I promise you 100% effort from my side, if you'll please help me. And since then, he's been absolutely superb. We've had a number of instances, and he's never pushed me. He's always let it come out in his own time. I had a home worker, support worker called Anne Hill, and she was amazing. She worked so well with Jason, and because obviously they're conversing all the time about what's going on, the team that I had around me, I don't work with Anne anymore, I work with a chap called Dave, and again, he's superb if you need anything, or if you just need to call him. So the team, I can't fault the team at Greenfield, are fantastic, including the receptionist, because the first few times I went, even the receptionist, it felt odd. But there was a young lady called Beth that worked behind reception, and she's moved on to something else. But the ladies that are there now, fabulous. They're so welcoming, they're so calm, so kind, so non-judgmental, and it makes a difference when your brain's going, you're mental, you're going nuts, you're not normal, and to be received like that makes a massive difference. I think I was discharged on the Tuesday, and the appointment was made for the Friday to go and see this chap. And I went there, and I sat there, and 45 minutes after my appointment time, but bear in mind that I was there 10 minutes early. What I didn't realise was the chap who was dealing with me had walked past me on 5, 6, 7, 8 occasions, and at no point had he said to me, I've got an emergency on, I'm dealing with this, I'll come back to you. And with a military mind, being late was never good anyway. And the amount of times I felt, I'm going, I'm just going to go. I didn't, I stayed. And eventually he came to me and he said, right, if you want to come in, no apology for being late, no reason, no explanation. And then I was in the room with him for perhaps 5 minutes, and I think he asked me 2 questions. I just didn't want to engage with the guy. If I can only point that one incident out of all the help that I've had from the Combined Healthcare Trust, that's pretty bloody good. There's a big gap between the Ministry of Defence and the NHS, and I have, over the last few years, started to make steps towards bridging that, because I don't believe there should be a gap, and I do believe the reason my symptoms are as bad as they are, have been as bad as they are, is because the MOD, once somebody leaves, basically just say, well, if they've got a problem, it's the NHS's issue now. But the NHS isn't trained to deal with people that have seen active service. There's still plenty of people that won't come to the combined healthcare veterans because they don't believe you understand. You don't get it. You don't understand us. You don't get it. And they're the ones that are most likely probably to take their own lives, because things will just keep getting higher and higher and higher and higher in their brain. And sooner or later, it overflows and bang. When you present as a veteran with mental health disorders, I believe you need to have a veteran who's had that similar sort of experience to talk to. Not just somebody who's served, but somebody who's had the mental health. When there's a new veteran that comes into one of our veteran centres, or that I come across through friends, I can help them, because I could start talking in military language, or I could start talking about things that happened to me and get them smiling and get them joking and tease bits of information out of them. And it makes them feel a little bit more accepted, because in a military mind, you're weak. If you've got mental health problems, if you've got an injury, whether it's a broken toe, spinal issues like I've got, PTSD like I've got, or fibromyalgia or anything, you're weak. I think investment in not veteran welfare so much, but in veteran communication maybe might be a good idea, because the diagnosis and things like that is obviously the doctor's department, but to get them to talk about it and to be able to put it into NHS terms needs somebody that's, 1, lived it, and 2, had the treatment for it and knows what works and what doesn't. Because one of the things that Jason's always done, and I admire him, and I know I keep going on about him, but he's like my big brother in that I admire him, because whenever I've talked about something in particular, he won't straight away say, what's that? I don't quite understand. He'll let me carry on, and then he'll either ask me the question then, or he'll go away and he will revise it, or find it, search it. And next time he sees me, he's more of an expert on it than I am. And that's great, because that's all you need. You just need somebody who can talk your language and somebody who understands. The amount of times I've just massive relief, massive big breath of relief, because he said something that I get, and how he explains it to me is brilliant. But I would like to thank the NHS as a whole, thank the board and everybody that works within the Combined Health Service, in particular those that I've mentioned, the staff, and everybody's just been amazing. And I think a lot of people perhaps will moan about certain things, but they forget about the good things. And the more we can bridge that gap between the military community, the veteran community in particular, and the NHS, the better. Because I don't think it's that far apart. I think it just needs some links in there to pull it in a little bit. And as the understanding gets better, I believe that I really want our trust to be the first to get a grip of it and really show everybody else, well, this is how we've done it and this is how it's done, and you can do this as well. Get the numbers of suicides and things regards PTSD and veterans. Get it down. Let's get it down, and let's get a lot more people helped, because the help's out there. We just need to channel it and get people not just signposting in that and go, well, just go and speak to them, they'll help you, but hold their hand while they're doing it. Go and do it with them. I think a lot of veterans feel that because they don't engage enough, they don't follow things through, and that's where it falls down.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. That was both interesting and provocative in a number of ways, which is really helpful. Does anybody want to kick off a discussion about that? There are some pretty clear messages coming through, but would anybody like to kick off that? That rang the bell for me. I'm sorry, my computer's going a bit slow at the moment, so if I'm not picking up messages, forgive me. PTSD is a feature of the lives of many who have been through more severe forms of COVID. And this is something that we are going to have to deal with on a wider basis than we've done before. And the other thing that struck me was the use of language, because we're not very good, certainly clinicians apart, not very good at speaking the right language. And as we are more and more becoming in direct contact as an organisation with the communities that we serve, we've got to learn a different language, the one that we're used to. And with the military, that's a need, and maybe peer involvement in the process would speed that. But I'm now caught up with things, so I've got on my screen and Joan and Philip. Can we take you in? So Keith.
I think David's struggling a little bit with his reception, isn't he? So I think he was saying that we've got Phil, Joan and Keith with hands up. So shall we go in that order?
Okay, thanks, thanks, Peter. I thought it was a very powerful session. I think we've got a bit of what noise in the background, haven't we? I don't know whether we've got somebody on mute. But what I was interested in was, I think David made some good points. There is an issue about language, and there's an issue about talking to people who know your experience. But I've also got the sense, and obviously I can't judge how fair his comment was, about the sense of military men and women being cut adrift once they left the army. And he did talk powerfully about trying to develop links, didn't he, between the NHS and the army. And that does seem to be a crucial interface as soldiers normalising to civilian communities. And I wondered whether what we did or what the NHS in general does by way of liaising with MOD to facilitate that that transition where it might be more difficult for some soldiers than others.
Phil, just to let you know that Lee is on the line, so he might be able to answer that question for us. I don't know, Lee, whether you'd be happy to give your view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point that you raised there, Phil. I think overall the veteran community feel let down by the Ministry of Defence in particular, not just the Army, obviously the RAF and the Navy as well. And I believe that what a lot of service people feel is as they leave the camp gates for the final time, they're on their own. So it's trained into us throughout our career from a very, very early stage that you don't look after yourself, you look after the chaps next to you. The idea is it brings the team tighter and tighter together. Even if you've got the weak link, you still rely on that weak link and you help that weak link get stronger. So once you are no longer part of that community, you're on your own. And that's how it feels as you come out. Now, I was past fit on my exit medical by the military as being fit to join the civilian community. At the time, they do a class called downgrading, which is a set of tests that they do to see how injured or how bad you are. And within my medical records, within my medical records, it quite clearly states on there that I should be considered for medical discharge due to spinal injuries and mental health. However, still, I was past fit and passed on to the civilian community. It's a very dark area once you leave because you haven't got the guys next to you. And you do feel that the MOD have kind of given you a size 11 up the backside. And all of a sudden, you're on your own. You still keep contact with some chaps and it helps with the veteran community. But the NHS isn't geared up to take on trauma of a battlefield or conflict variety, just because, not because the NHS can't deal with those issues, it's because they can't deal with those issues particularly with the Army, because it's the way that we talk, it's the way that we communicate, it's the things that we see. There's a very interesting film that I'll just mention very briefly that I know that Jason Snape has watched. It's called Kajaki. It's based in Afghanistan, and there's some extremely colourful language, but it shows you just how tight the brotherhood is within the military and just how hard one will fight for the other. And it's not a war film in that there's lots of shooting and what have you. It's a war film of involving a minefield and involving desperation and the lack of support. And that's the kind of mentality that the soldiers have. So if you do get a chance to watch Kajaki, I would suggest that you do. And then perhaps that will at least give a little bit of an insight into the way that a veteran's mind works. So therefore, that's the reason why people like myself want to help to bridge that gap. I believe it's not that far away. I just believe, as you've mentioned, that the peer-to-peer thing needs to be developed. I do know the NHS have got the veteran champions, or you know, the armed forces champions that they use within the NHS generally. The problem with that is most of these people are ex-service people that have left, that haven't got mental health, haven't got PTSD. So to talk about military issues, absolutely fine, but as soon as you enter the realms of PTSD, you've got no chance, not whatsoever, because one veteran that sees another veteran, or one soldier sees another veteran that's injured, they're a weak link, and they just don't. Once you're not part of that team. If you can't perform your role, if you aren't performing to the standard that you're supposed to, they just don't understand. They think that you're a malingerer or a sick note, or even as I talk to veterans that I know will post things on social media that will basically say, yeah, but at the end of the day, we were all there. So those that have got PTSD are either weak-minded or shouldn't have been there in the first place. Now, that's really harsh. And it's one of those things that, you know, we know exists. It's something that's developing all the time. But I believe our trust is in a perfect position. And the combined health services with the staff that you've got, and in particular with Jason Snape, working with myself and unlocking as much as we have, I think there's a really good opportunity there to do something with this.
Thank you for that, Lee, and thank you for your contribution. I have seen that film and it's pretty harrowing.
Yeah, it's. I think for those that haven't seen it, it is worth a watch, isn't it? Because it's. I've been in instance myself where you feel despair and you feel there's no way out and you wonder what's going to happen. And I've discussed these a lot with Jason. One particular instance I'll share very quickly was on the side of a hill in the famous Sniper Rally, and we had a broken down Land Rover and we had another Land Rover behind it, and we were being constantly hit with sniper fire and an AK-47 fire, which was falling short, to be fair, because they were in a small copse, which was probably about 500 meters away. So they were shooting at us, and they were, trying to get a reaction. Now, we were serving as S-Force, so we could fire back, but you couldn't get yourself into a position to fire back because of the nature of we had the high ground, but obviously they were focused on us constantly. So we were to the side of the vehicles, and nobody really knew what to do. To cut a long story short, we dismissed the troops onto a low path which took them away from the high ground and out of sight. I jumped in the rear Land Rover and another guy jumped in the front Land Rover, and I shunted him over the top of the brow, and we went down the other side away from the fire. So we were under fire, but we did it anyway. But the hour that we were sat there waiting for air support or waiting for the quick reaction force to come and help us, there was nothing coming. So it was a choice of stay there and risk that they advance on us, and there was only 8 of us, bear in mind, or do something about it. And yeah, we opted to do something about it, took the risk and resolved the situation and carried on with our day. But it was it's not a nice position to be in, and if you haven't been there in that environment to understand what it feels like to have a Dragunov 7.62 round come pretty close to you, it messes with your head quite a lot, to be fair.
David, right, are you back with us? I've seen, apologies folks, I've seen David pop back in, but I'm not sure that his connectivity is still quite what he would like it to be. So Joe.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, Lee, thank you so much for giving us this presentation, and I'm really glad that we've got Jason excuse me, with us on the line as well. And I think it's just great to see that kind of a partnership here within our trust. And I think all that you've said and the real powerful testimony that you've given us, I think for us as a board, what we have to do is look at where does this lead us, what is the next step. And I've always been very conscious that, for example, with physical health, the armed forces and the MOD had particular dedicated MOD services, which then got dispersed, if you like, within the NHS, but nonetheless with a kind of particular priority for ex-armed forces veterans. And I've never been sure what similar corresponding facility there is in terms of mental health and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I just feel personally, and I'd like your kind of view on this really, we're in an area where we've got quite a large recruitment across all the armed forces. We've got Whittington Barracks in Stafford, and we've got a very kind of long, proud history of links with the armed forces. We've got an armed forces charter, which I know there was a flurry of activity, certainly round about 2015, when councils and various bodies were queuing up to sign the Armed Forces Charter. And I think we were one of them. This trust was one of them as well. But I'm not sure anything's been done with it. And when we had the video that you've just repeated at our quality committee, I think one of the things that we wanted to do was perhaps look at how we could have some kind of a deep dive into what needs to be put in place to strengthen that link between the military and the transformation, if you like, back into civilian life and the ongoing support mechanisms that are needed. And I, for one, would be really interested, and you talk about our trust, and I'm glad you think it's yours as well as ours, because it is ours. What would you suggest that we did to actually have a next step, so that we've got a very proud and active Armed Forces Charter that we've signed up to, and that we can show and measure how we're actually reaching out and maintaining that contact.
They're really great points, Joan. Thank you very much for the compliments within that. And I'll ask Jason to speak shortly about this as well, because one of the things I've been looked after by Jason now for 3 years. It started 2018, and one of the things that has developed from that is the passion that I have for helping veterans and moving things forward. I receive an armed forces pension from the war disablement pension plus PIP and what have you, and that's what sort of keeps me afloat lifestyle wise, as in, you know, I get fed and I can pay my bills. Now that's wonderful. However, that makes me feel like a second-class citizen, because I feel like one of these people that sits on the backside watching Jeremy Kyle and not working. So Jason helped to lift that, and he invited me to do a expert patient talk with some students from, I believe they were from Kiel, and it started that way. Jason was discussing PTSD to the medical students from a clinical perspective, and then I told my story afterwards. And one of the biggest things that came back from that was the majority of feedback said that they really wanted or wished that the rest of the course and other people within the training establishment could see the presentation, because they believe that it's so valuable to have that. Now, I know there are expert patient talks and things out there, but I think on something in regard to this, and say no mistake, I absolutely categorically blame the Ministry of Defence without a shadow of a doubt, and I believe that some of their budget should be dedicated to the NHS in resolving this problem, because it is it's a pandemic, and the amount of military charities that are out there that say we'll help you, we'll do this, we'll do that, it's fog. It's absolute fog, because the majority of people, and I do know lots of veterans, and I advise them as best as I can from my perspective, but obviously I'm not qualified or trained. I try to signpost people in a way that's not going to dismantle any of the treatment they've had before, or try to give them false promises. I try to give them the reality of it and give it from my perspective. Now, I believe, and I have discussed this with Jason, and I'll ask Jason to speak about this in a second, but I believe that by having the talks within the NHS, within the Combined Healthcare Trust, because believe me, if it wasn't for this Combined Healthcare Trust, and it's repeatedly, I would not be sat here talking to you now. And I don't say that in any sort of attention-seeking way or anything. It's absolute fact. I would be dead 3 or 4 times over. And if it comes down to training in ways to address veterans, or at least how we can get in touch with certain charities that will offer the assistance as well on the fly, then the peer-to-peer system for the troops, and I'll absolutely stand up and say bring me in, and I will help with that massively. And I believe that Jason thinks that training of staff from secretarial level right the way up to consultant level about what the veteran goes through, and what goes more likely what goes through their mind as a civilian, and I think we could achieve an awful lot. But please do ask Jason's opinion on that.
Yeah, no, I really hope there's a way that we can be very structured in how we actually follow up, and, you know, the many points that you've raised going forward as a trust.
Thanks, Joan. I think I'm back in the loop. It's a hardware problem.
David,
You've gone again, David.
Oh no, am I not with you?
You are intermittently with us, yes.
Yeah.
Can I persevere just for a little longer? Just shout at me if you lose me. Okay, or wave or something. But Lee, the way that you've expressed your experiences and the positive set of suggestions that you've made have been enormously helpful. And I can see there are still a lot of hands up to talk about this. So we'll go on a little bit longer. and I think you wanted Jason to come in as well. Shall we move over to Keith and then Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Lee, I'm a jobbing GP in Badley Green. What I'm interested in is the delay in you realizing there's a problem and actually receiving the appropriate treatment and help. Now, this has been recognized before, and we do have what are called veteran-friendly practices. First of all, I'd like your view. Do they actually work? Do they actually do anything? Or is it just another label? And then the other thing I'm interested in is there a way you can gain access without necessarily having to go to a GP? Now, when we first suggested this years ago, and we talked about direct access to Healthy Minds and the access team, it was very much frowned upon, but it is incredibly successful. The GP can facilitate treatment, but it can also be a barrier. It can be somebody you don't want to speak to about these matters. And I would just value your opinion on those 2 points, if I may ask you, please.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the questions. And first of all, the instigation of the veteran-friendly GPs. There are a number dotted around the city, and I currently am with the Orchard Surgery with Dr. Gindy.
Yeah.
Now, on the whole, that system kind of works in regard that you can get a little bit more understanding because you're a veteran, and there tends to be a little bit more referral to contact the access team or speak to your CPN. So some things are painless in that, for example, I don't have to go to the surgery. Forget the COVID situation, but prior to that, I wouldn't have to go to the surgery unless it was something that they needed to have eyes on. But generally, it would be a telephone or video conversation, which is superb for veterans because a lot of veterans don't want to leave home, and that's just our mentality. And I don't like crowded spaces. It's a very stressful time. So that's a massive plus, is to have those. But I do believe that GPs as a whole within the city should also be part of the training that's being proposed to come and have a chat and to perhaps see the video and take on board the difficulty that goes through a veteran's mind. It's not the thing with veterans is it's not poor me, poor me, poor me. The question of how are you is usually answered with the word fine, but they're not. But they won't talk. My initial contact with the NHS from leaving the army in 2000 was 2010. That was the very first time I spoke to anybody, and I knew I'd got a problem whilst in the army, and I'd carried it on. It cost me a marriage, and it cost me access to my children at the time, and that's not through violence or anything else. It's through behaviour and not recognizing. I knew I'd got a problem because I'd seen the doctors for depression and things, but didn't elaborate until I met, and I forget his name unfortunately, but there was a very young doctor that was based at the Middleport Medical Centre some years ago who was absolutely superb, and he saw on my records that I was military, and he started to tease things out, and he was the one that sent me to the Harplands to have an assessment. And if it wasn't for him, I perhaps wouldn't have gone down that route. And as time went by, I dipped in and out of the service, mainly because I couldn't unlock. I needed the help, but didn't feel ready to take it was a big part of it. I hadn't met anybody that would encourage me enough to take the help either. And then everything just seemed to break all of a sudden. And I agreed to go back to the Greenfield Centre, and was very fortunate that my notes were looked at and taken on board by Jason, and we kind of went from there, as you saw in the video. I don't think that if it hadn't have been for that individual GP, I don't think that I would have gone in that direction. And I think that there's some GPs that are understanding of it, and there's some GPs that are blasé about it, not blasé about the illness, but blasé about the veteran thing, because they just don't quite grasp that. But why would they? Why? it's not a thing that you learn in medical college about veterans and about how different combat PTSD is to perhaps complex PTSD or other varieties. It's a specialism in its own, and without being able to grasp that veteran and say, right, talk to this veteran, let's find out where his needs are best, and just don't push him. If you don't know how to respond, don't blag him and don't push him. Get somebody in who does know and let them help you. It's not everybody needs to ask for help if they're not sure. With a veteran, veterans will kill themselves as soon as look at somebody, as soon as harm somebody. They'd rather take their own lives because of shame and having to own up to having this issue, and that's a big problem we need to deal with.
Okay, thank you. There are some patient stories which cry out for a longer discussion than we've got time for, and this is absolutely one of them. But a few more minutes still. I want to leave a bit of space for Jason, but Peter, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just wondering whether it's worth just bringing in Jason now. He's been mentioned on many occasions, and I'm conscious you put your hand down, Jason. But is there anything that you do want to say, and then maybe I could just provide a few words to wrap up and propose a few next steps, perhaps.
Good.
Thank you, sir. But I think to just embellish what's been said already, rather than going a bit of a monologue, there are a few key areas I think that we need to work with, that Lee and I have worked with on. I think Lee has had a very, very severe form of PTSD, very, very intensive, and his commitment has been absolutely 100%. He's seen it right the way through and shown how much somebody can improve and regain control of their lives as well, not just in the case of the actual disorder. But there are 4 areas I would think in terms of providing a better service, more informed service. One is that with PTSD and veterans, they've lived in a highly regulated environment outside of society, but all the protective factors of that environment have been shattered by the traumatic experience. They are then, by Lee's descriptions, dismissed from that environment as well. So they have moved into ordinary society, which has got different values, and they don't have a sense of belonging anywhere. And the sense of being welcome and being validated, having their experience authenticated, is crucial, but very difficult to do, when you haven't been in the armed forces and you've worked in the NHS. So there needs to be an understanding about how to bridge that. That's one thing we worked on. Certainly that was something that medical students sort of soaked up in terms of the context for treating the disorder. The second thing that's crucial to me is that, and Lee would tell you more about this if you had time, but it's so important that what the military seems to have told the soldiers is that it's a disease of character, and it's not. And Lee mentioned the brain thing. I'm fortunate that I'm a national expert in trauma. I'm very highly qualified to deal with it. So there are some areas which I'm specifically expert in. And this issue about brain function, which is not inside the normal model, it's not inside the typical NHS model, just explains to him this is actually a functional disorder and not down to weakness of character. And that made a massive difference in his engagement because he felt he personally wasn't at fault. It also gave him some sense of control. He got somebody to deal with and wasn't so self-critical. The third point would be about treatment and diagnosis. One of the difficulties that's encountered is that because PTSD symptoms work in separate clusters and may present as a very mixed bag, people can variously, with PTSD, can present as depressed on one occasion, possibly psychotic on another, have a personality disorder. And when it's sort of 2 o'clock in the morning, you're the on-call doctor, or that presentation persists for a few days and you're seen afterwards, you may well be misdiagnosed because it's what's in front of the doctor that's actually, and that leads you down a bit of a dead end. And then we have people who disengage. Lee has been told before that he's just got severe anxiety. Well, he has, but that's the tip of the iceberg. And the NICE guidelines are only a sliver of the sort of whole holistic model that needs to be done to resolve trauma. The good thing about that is the more severe the trauma is, the more responsive it is to treatment. So we've got to build that in. And the last thing I would say is it requires a degree of resilience to deal with the extent of the traumatic material that's being presented by the patient, in particular veterans who've seen combat zones. I've worked in forensic services for a long time, so I'm used to dealing with more traumatized episodes of care, if you like. That gives me an advantage, but certainly that resilience is important in building it up. But that's a two-way thing. You find that as you progress, resilience builds up on both sides, and more difficult material can be dealt with if the treatment is on the correct pathway. That's my views in a nutshell.
Thanks very much. Lee, did you just want to add something?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I just wanted to. I forgot at the beginning to thank the board and the trust for the opportunity to speak to you and to raise these issues on behalf of the veterans. One of the things that Jason talked about, I think it was in his second point, made the hair stand up on the back of my neck in the realization of things that we've talked about before. One of the biggest issues that Jason had to get out of me was shame and that I was a coward. Now, that goes across the board. Veterans fear, but they don't know what they fear. And until it's dealt with, that's one of the biggest issues. My fear was that I was a coward on the day of the event, and it sort of resonated that actually I wasn't a coward because I was brave enough to stand there in the first place and be there. But you're not. The way that the military training, you don't realise that. You think that you are a coward because of how you've reacted, which is why they don't open up, which is why they clam up. And obviously, over a period of time that it takes to come out and speak to somebody, that manifests itself and grows greatly. But I just wanted to say thank you to Jason, but thank you to the board and everybody that's here for listening and taking on board the thoughts and the points.
Thanks, Lee, and thank you to you. Peter, do you want to wrap up on this as to where we carry it?
Thank you, David. I mean, obviously, firstly, a huge thank you to yourself, Lee, for taking the time out today, and Jason as well, in terms of your input there at the end. These sessions are never easy to wrap up on, because they tend to be complex issues, situations. I think this is probably the hardest one I've had to date to wrap up on, given the nature of the subject, the unique nature of the subject. So I'll just say a couple of things, I think. So firstly, I'm hearing loud and clear the really important role that we have in terms of communication with the veteran population more generally, aside from any conditions that individuals might have, that broad communication piece. So absolutely, we'll get on to that. I've written down lived experience, and that's been mentioned on umpteen occasions over the last half hour or so. So that's come through loud and clear. But coupled with that lived experience, which of course brings with it a huge amount of knowledge and understanding, that there's a general educational piece here, isn't there, about all of the stuff that, I mean, Jason in particular has just really helpfully listed and summarised there, those 4 key points. It's all well and good to have the lived experience piece within the organisation, but fundamentally, all of our clinicians and those that support our clinicians need to have an appropriate understanding, really, of what is going on with our veterans. So I think for me, it's far broader than the specifics around communication and lived experience. I think there's a broader training piece that can be supported through those lived experience individuals, but needs to really be fundamentally embedded in the organisation. What I would also mention is Kenny has popped in the chat a happy to support that piece note. So I think that the obvious link here in terms of next steps is to take that work that I've just summarised, and Kenny, I'm sure, will do a great job of utilising your skills, Lee. I feel really naughty on the one hand in kind of requesting and suggesting this, but obviously you've articulated yourself incredibly well over the last half hour or so. So I'm sure that you'll do a wonderful job, however little or much you're willing to work with us over coming months. So yes, it's an absolute yes. Please do get involved. And as I say, I think from here on, Kenny will be a great link through. And the last thing I'll say is what I said at the start. Massive thank you. Incredibly passionate, thought-provoking story, and unique, which is massively important on these sessions, to get those unique stories so that we can learn from them. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. And I will absolutely engage as required. Let Jason know, or contact me directly, or however you feel best, and I'll do my best. So thank you, really, really massive thank you for everybody for listening and the feedback appreciated.